patience. Wanted to give some time for others to come. First of all, good afternoon. Thanks for enduring the hot and humid weather. Scott reminded me that it's cooler in Grand Rapids.
Oh, it's great.
So I got to get up there soon. Wanted to kind of just give some opening remarks, then kind of jump right into the working session that's going to be led by Karen DeYoung. Obviously, over this past weekend, you all have heard by now of Justine Damone, who was shot and killed in Minneapolis. That is currently still under investigation by the DCA, and obviously will be under investigation until that information is turned over to the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. Obviously, a couple things. One is the urgency of the work that we're doing. The recommendations we're doing is we knew that it was urgent before, and it's still even more urgent now regarding what we bring forth to the governor, to the legislature as well. The other thing is, too, there are families hurting on both sides as we speak around this incident. I'm not here to make any conclusions or determinations on the facts of what's going on there, but I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge these things continue to happen while we are continuing to do our work. So I wanted to acknowledge that. If folks have either questions, concerns, thoughts about it, obviously this is a space that's open to hearing those. Obviously in my role, I can't tell you and talk about what the BCA is doing. That's not my responsibility, and that's not something I would be willing to do anyway. But I wanted to just acknowledge that, and the urgency of the work that we're doing is very important. Any comments, questions, thoughts? Yes,
Yeah, question, when is our deadline again? What's the date?
Sure, the deadline for submission is September 29th.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I guess I need to say something. I mean, there's a lot of things I'd like to say, but I think what was said last time we met by Chief Johnson is that this is about saving lives. And I think we all know that it's about saving lives now, no matter what color a person is or where they come from. I think we have to admit that this is falling on our shoulders to resolve, and we need to be as aggressive as possible in saving these lives.
Thank
You know,
you.
I think sometimes we are our own worst enemy. It wasn't that long ago that Minneapolis and St. Paul were doing all their own officer-involved shooting investigations. I remember one time I taught a class with St. Paul officers, and I was from the suburban department. And that subject came up, and they said, well, the reason why we do it is because you out there in the suburbs don't have that many homicides, and you don't really know how to investigate them, whereas in St. Paul, we have quite a few of them, and we can investigate them adequately, and the officers missed the whole point. It was about avoiding even the perception of conflict of interest. But when I say that, I think sometimes we're our own worst enemy. Here's something that on the surface just seems bizarre. We don't know what happened. And yet we, as the police, are putting nothing out to the public. Yeah. I don't know. My opinion, just one police chief's opinion, is that's a mistake. Put something out there. And I think too often that's the case. Yeah, officers have their rights, but the community has the right also to know what the heck happened. And I think by not doing that, sometimes we create new stories ourselves. That's one perspective.
Others? To the senator's point, one of the things that I would able to talk to some of you about individually, I wanted to bring to the larger group is not only the urgency of this work, but the ability for us to do some things that are outside of the norm, to push the envelope, to do some things that, you know, it may not be politically expedient, it may not even be politically possible, depending on what, you know, side of the aisle you determine you're on, but we don't have to determine that here. We can reach out and do some things that push this work forward. So I encourage you to continue to do that. I know you already have been doing that, but as we take input, and Karen will go in more detail about this. We've heard quite a bit from the listening sessions. We've received videos from your those listening sessions and summary notes. Take into consideration what are some of the things you're hearing. What are some of the things that people want to, just saying, what are some of the other things that people want to see in the recommendation that we didn't see before? So I encourage you to keep pushing that envelope and being creative and innovative as we sort through this. Yusuf?
Yusuf and Janie with the Minnesota Dakota NAACP. I'm sitting in for W.C. Jordan. I'm not pretending to be him. Some of us worked long and hard on body camera legislation, both in the legislature and in our local communities. And one of the things that keeps occurring to me is that every local law enforcement agency in the state will have their own policy. And when I go fishing in Washington County, I drive through at least a dozen municipalities going and coming back. And each of them has its own policies for when officers turn on the cameras and so on and so forth. And I think at some point we may need, as a state, to re-examine this issue and look at how consistent or inconsistent we are across municipalities in terms of enforcement of body camera policies within local departments and within state law enforcement agencies.
Thank you. Let's see the person. Other thoughts, comments?
Jim, I have a question about a statement that you just said. I haven't been able to find any of the notes or the videos from the listening session. I don't know if it's just an issue that I'm having or if other council members haven't received those as well.
Okay, so we'll resend those. They should have been sent by email, links to the videos, and links to the summary, so we'll resend those out.
Okay, thanks.
Other thoughts or comments before we jump into the work group? Okay. Hearing none, I'll turn over to Karen.
I've got something out those of you who were here at the last meeting, Trista did an activity where we envisioned our future to get us all on the same page in terms of where we want it to be, the work that we wanted to do as a council, what we wanted that future to look like. And I just wanted us all to have a copy of that so that that's sort of like a baseline for us. So we may disagree on how to get there, but we all have the expectation that this is what we want to see, how we want to think and feel and do as we move forward. Trista, did you have anything else you wanted to, I know you did the summary, but. The other thing that we did at the last council meeting, if you look at this latest iteration of the report, starting on page 3, each of the work groups put together a charge for their group. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to review that. I did send out the charges to the respective co-chairs. I got okay for the most part except for a couple. The police training work group, there was one question about the community, how community would be involved, and then the policy group. I don't think I got much feedback on that. So if you just want to take a minute to review those and see if you have any questions or suggestions for other council members about their charge. Yes, just today, right before the meeting, saying that it looked good. But I'm just wondering if people have comments or suggestions? Does it seem like an accurate representation? The question for the police training work group was that second bullet. What does that, there was some question about to what degree community had a voice and what that would look like.
I think that was probably mine to answer. I was certainly instrumental in helping us put that in. Is this a time to address it?
Sure.
I think that we recognize that there's a lot of knowledge at the table and around the circle, and that the recommendations that we're moving forward, although they're categorical, they're not as detailed, represent areas of training that we agree are needed and need focus. We also, in the third bullet, insisted that those areas of training would be understood and supported by a diverse, inclusive, and broad base of community stakeholders. But I think our discussion when this one was added, and this one is determined via a participatory process in which the community has a voice, was that there needs to be some link. You know, what is it that gives the community a voice of community policing? You know, if in fact this is about police and community relations, what is the tie? And is it an annual community policing or training meeting that happens? Or, you know, is this something that we in our work group, as we are promoting through the recommendation in our final report, would air in the community and receive support for? So it could either be here in our work group that there was a need for some kind of feedback. It's not just, okay, we heard you and here's our recommendation, but we heard you and here's our recommendation to you, that we would receive the support and endorsement of a community.
So what it sounds like you're saying is that in that bullet, there's the commitment to a participatory process that includes the community, but in the recommendations themselves, you could flesh out what that would look like
looks like.
specifically.
Yeah.
Are there any other comments on the charges? I think I heard from just about every other group. Got an okay at least from the work chairs. But I'm interested if others have, from other work groups have comments on the charges.
It may be proved, she hit on what we were trying to
Yeah.
kind of decipher, what is that link, right? Given that we are going farther outside the box here, with the girls, because it may be prudent or time to suggest that we require a written agreement between police departments and their community stakeholders that would encompass a lot of those links, up to and including, you know, an annual review to measure, to see if, and that could have things in it as simple as, you know, giving out a business card at a traffic stop all the way up to civilian review boards, I mean, and everything in between.
The sense is a customer service kind of.
Well, exactly, and that's not something that is necessarily written by the police department itself, and I'm gonna use my own agency again. We've had one of those agreements in St. Cloud for 14 years. And it's been reviewed, and there's some things in there that we are required to do, right, every year in terms of reaching out to our community so that we can gauge their temperature on how they think we're doing, and then you take things out that are no longer necessary or are outdated, and you add whatever new challenges your community is having in that agreement. And you come together every year, and each side kind of checks on the other. And you don't wait for a year, right? You're doing things throughout the year. But it's not something that the police department or the city dictates and says, okay, we want this in here. There's a broad spectrum of people, representative of the entire community, that sit down and help craft that with the assistance of the police. But at the end of the day, it's not us saying, okay, that's okay to put in there, but not that. Certainly.
Is it something, Commissioner, maybe the mechanism I wrote down, some agencies utilize law enforcement advisory boards for their committee. Is that somewhat what you're envisioning? I'm just thinking about what the mechanism is to sort of gather up and provide that input and that piece to the law enforcement officials of that particular community.
Yeah, Nathan, I think that certainly could be a mechanism. I hesitate to name it because I don't know that that's what
Right.
law enforcement advisories actually do. But it is that place of bringing forward a plan to the community so that there's a real meaning to the phrase community policing. We've talked a lot about how that might look different in different communities, and true, it could. But that conversation happens, and there is that agreement and understanding is really what makes community policing
Right.
work. So yeah, it could be the law enforcement advisory. I just don't know if that's what they do, and I think we need to put some meat on what that process would be.
Another model might be the community development model, which is a community benefits agreement model. I know that has worked for kind of more project-based community efforts, and I don't know if you could apply that kind of a model to kind of a long-term, agreement between a community and police.
That's a very good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, Ann and I were thinking along the same line. As a community benefits agreement is typically one that covers a broad range of stakeholders, and it's time certain. So there's a start date to it, and then accountability base to it in terms of review, typically on an annual basis. And then there's some direction enough for folks to be, because this will be statewide, and every community, to your point, will look differently. But we at least could maybe consider putting some examples of potential outlets, right? So including but not limited to or restricted by, and then have a couple of examples for illustration, so whatever would work in that particular community can come to fruition without binding someone's hands on that, but at least provide some direction. I think that'd be
Certainly the sort of model that would work.
And there are some parts of it that will be universal, for example, the complaint process. What we did here in our community is broke it down into 3 different subcommittees, and one covered the complaints process, one covered the engagement and outreach process. So some of those things could be universal, but certainly there could be some modifications and nuances, right, for every community, because they're not all the same. But at the end of the day, it has to be more than a piece of paper. It has to be something that buy-in from, right, from both sides, not just from one. And so there's the question: how do you do that? Or how does this group compel an entity to do that and buy it? You know what I mean?
Any other comments about this particular discussion or the charges in general?
I would say, that what I would be looking for would be to move forward a recommendation that communities have in place a community benefits-like agreement, which lays out the principles from which the policies and practices of the department flow, and in essence is an agreement with the community. This is coming out of training. I don't doubt that it applies to other areas as well. And so again, coming out of training, I would be making that recommendation, but want us to consider for all areas of this work, how that might apply.
And it intersects with the wellness group when I read some of their charges, right? That's part of their charge as well, so you've got that intersection.
So Commissioner, so what you were asking is that you would like to add that to your list of recommendations?
Yes, we'll work through it in our training group, but I'm also suggesting that beyond training, this applies to other areas of the work. Certainly the workplace policies and recruitment and retention, as well as health and wellness. Not looking at what the other names of the areas are, but can we lift that up for final discussion after today of how we embody it across?
Any other comments?
So just to piggyback up on that, there might be kind of an overdue kind of statement to that effect that gives the spirit of that across different areas. So it reinforces what you're saying. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Overarching statement, statement of principle.
So just I want to make sure, so what you're requesting is, aside from the recommendations, before the recommendations is an overarching statement that reflects that desire for the community benefits process, or what? I want to make sure that I'm clear about what the next steps are.
Right, I was reinforcing.
Yeah, no, and you had your
Yeah.
return that way, so I want to make sure I heard what you're
Yes,
saying, so.
statement of principle.
Okay, great.
So, yeah, I accept that friendly second.
So is that a recommendation, so are we taking a vote, or was it just?
No.
Okay, oh, okay,
Just show.
all right. Any other comments? Questions? We are going to move into small groups to look at the recommendations, but I just wanted to bring up, just as the person who's been integrating feedback into the report, so what you have here is what I have so far. So I have seen changes or lack of changes in the recommendations based on the community feedback, the review reports now that we've had. And I want to make sure that we can be clear and transparent to the community about how that information was digested, read, what process, if any, there was for including that feedback. So I'm just wondering if we can have a discussion about that so that we can make sure that's documented somewhere and be able to respond to it.
And to that point, I just text David, in the email announcements, it's been included as attachments, so like the links. And if you're like me, I don't read the attachments to email, like meeting announcements, so we're gonna send them in a separate email now. We're preparing now for all of that. So those are the notes from the listening sessions plus the videos. So to the extent you haven't gotten those, we'll put them all in one email so you can receive them. So you may not have had all that originally, so we'll make sure you get that. So this discussion could be, once you receive that, how will you process that in your smaller groups, even if you haven't gotten it yet? How will community feedback look in helping to either modify or look at possible modification of those recommendations?
Open it up for comments? Yes.
Karen, I just want to clarify the role of the policy implementation group, because it's kind of like the anomaly of the groups. And early on, we settled on this charge that we have, and Denny's here, which is good, because as I noted in my email to you, we lost to Jim is gone, Denny's still here, so that's good. We have Kevin and Luz and I. Kevin over here, and we didn't have a law enforcement person on that, so Scott is helping us out. So the policy implementation group, as you see, as it's defined here, is charged with coming up with ideas on how to move the collective sense of the recommendations forward to the legislature, to the community, to the cities, to law enforcement agencies, to whatever. So as I see it, it's kind of an aggregation of thought about, okay, you have these recommendations, so now what? Clearly, many of them are going to require legislative action, policy action, on behalf of a collective body of some sort. As you look through these recommendations, you note that there are already suggestions. So I'd like to just make 3 key points. One is that we will factor in what you've already been implying, and that's good. That some of these you're saying this is how we think we ought to go forward. We're just going to pull that out. 2, at some point in time, and I think what we need is direction from you or James, of when does our formality start? And when are the recommendations to a point where now we should take them and do our work? Actually, 4. 3 is, I don't see it, this is just my opinion, and I haven't heard from the committee to say otherwise, that we are going to go through every recommendation one by one and say this is what you ought to do. It's going to be kind of a collective body of work. And then finally, when we're finished, like the whole report, I would guess, is gonna come back to this group for additional clarification, review, edit, and development. So that's how I see it, but we don't know that yet because we haven't got direction or we haven't confirmed with that. So does that make sense, Karen? Is that-
I'm going to defer to Mr. Burrows for that
Sure.
response.
So it all makes sense. I think you should start the work now. So the recommendations may change and be modified along the way, but they've been in this form for like the last several months. So if something falls out or doesn't make it, we can just take it out of the analysis. But the analysis you talked about, there's some things going to require legislation, some policy change, some community agreements. Start bucketing those items down and talk about the implementation around those particular strategies. I start that work now. The other piece of it is, obviously, I gave you the date of the 29th as far as final recommendations. We need to back into that by saying these recommendations need to be finalized with the implementation committee before that, so we can have time to review this as a collective group. So once your work is done, let's say at the end of August, looking at the recommendations, bringing them back to the group, we're discussing as a larger group what that looks like, what that strategy looks like. So I'd say we waited early on because the recommendations were changing quite a bit. They were being, modified a lot. They still may change some, so I'm not saying that they won't. But we have a good, I think, solid group to start with. So I think that work can start now.
Is that a good deadline for us, the end of August?
Let me think through that. I
Okay.
said it off the top of my head, so rather than
Yeah, no, that's why I
top of my
asked.
head stuff, let me think through that, and I'll have the answer for you. I want to make sure that this gives the committees enough time to get you the information to you by the end of August. You do your work and get it back to us so we can have a September meeting before the 29th.
Just let us know.
Okay.
Thank you.
James, is it your intent to have this body, all the voting members vote on some type of document which includes all the recommendations? I mean, up to now, it's been committee work, and I don't know what other committees are doing. I'm reading some of this stuff now, but will we, as committee members, have an opportunity to vote on things?
So, good question. We have been, and it's a long answer to a good question. So when this council was originally started, we had 15 voting members, 17 ex officio members. And the reason behind that was in an executive order, you can only have up to 15 voting members. You can't have more than that. So in order to have a larger committee with more breadth, if we wanted to, we had to make them ex officio members. We have not made, during these sessions, that kind of distinction. Meaning, I haven't said, well, Blair, you got 2 voting members on your committee, you got 1 non-voting, they don't have as much input or don't have as much of a vote. My goal is to get to the committee work, bring it back after going to the policy implementation committee to the full body, and have those recommendations be reflected by this is what the committees have decided as a consensus on this is what we want to bring forward, this is what we want the full body to bring forward. To be quite honest with you, I want to have to get my legal advice from our general counsel to determine can the ex officio members have any input in whether there's a vote, or I might not even call a vote, to be quite honest. So let me think through the final answer to that, but I do want to make it clear here. Everybody's opinion at this table, all 32 members, has been equally given input and feedback. I want to make sure that in those smaller groups, whether you're a voting member or not, that continues to happen. Whether we vote on these final recommendations with the 15 voting members and not 17, I want to have more discussion about that as a group. Because right now, only the voting members can vote on the recommendations, but all the other people can do the work on the recommendations. So, long answer to your question, but I wanted to fully explain how we got to where we are and how I want to make sure everybody's opinions are valued and heard. Danny,
Well, but that really didn't, that addressed part of my concern, but I think the executive order is clear that only voting members are going to be able to vote on whatever it is whatever comes out to the governor and subsequently to the legislature. So that's not unclear to me, but what you didn't address is, will the group get a final document of all the list of recommendations, and will we have an opportunity to vote on it? Because clearly, I doubt that all of us will agree on every every recommendation. And so we need to have, I believe, we need to have some time to state our concerns. You know, I doubt that I'll be able to embrace every recommendation of every work group. So I just want to know, will I have an opportunity to, on record, voice my opposition to any of the recommendations?
So you will have an opportunity on the record to voice your opposition.
Okay, thank you very much.
And the question for me is, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that those outside of the work groups, other council members can give their feedback and influence the recommendations of that particular group.
Correct.
But the members of that particular group have the final say. It's not a collective council-wide decision about the recommendations in each respective work group.
Right, so if I'm hearing you correctly, so the training group, the members of that training group can get input and feedback from others, but the training group will come forth with, these are our recommendations.
Right. And that the other council members do not have the option to say, we don't agree with this, therefore take it out. It's a
Well,
decision of
they
the,
can't-
well, they can voice it.
They can't
but
take it out,
can't,
they
right,
can voice their
right, they can voice
opposition
their
to
opposition.
it clearly, based upon them having an input, yes, in voice opposition. You can't take it out.
So this is run by committees, not by the voting members of the council.
Both and. So the committees are doing the substantive work around what are the recommendations going to be around different areas. When it comes to the full council, when it comes out to the full council, there'll be opportunity for folks to voice their opposition to what they see in the recommendations.
And to vote on these matters?
Well, there will be a vote on the matters, but this is what the vote, I don't anticipate the vote being this. I don't anticipate the vote taking out something that's in the recommendations. If you want to vote no against a particular recommendation or yes against a particular recommendation, you can voice that opposition. As I say, you can voice opposition. It won't be removing it from the recommendations based upon a no vote or a yay vote.
So what's the point of being on the commission that if you cannot influence or influence or make any decisions on recommendations? If I don't agree with the work of some committee, you're saying all I can do is say, I disagree with that, but I can't ask for a vote to see if other members agree with me and subsequently amend or?
Oh, you can, no, you can ask for a vote. So you can ask for a vote, express your opposition, and if the voting members decide we're going to remove all of the training recommendations, they can do that.
Okay, thank you.
The goal is to reach consensus.
That's the goal.
How do you do that otherwise?
Hey, the legislature can't do it. Maybe we can run the state.
Well, I can't disagree with that, but
James?
Thank
All right, we won't battle that one.
No.
Yes.
One of the ways we might avoid a bottleneck, because there have been substantive discussions within committees, but not on an intra-committee basis, would be to provide the recommendations, the contact information, and a deadline for people to provide comments or constructive criticisms or suggestions, so that we don't get to the very end and then have a okay corral debate about what's good and what's not. Give people an opportunity to make meaningful input so that those committees can then consider it, because I think when we sit as a committee as a whole is where the chaos has the potential to overtake the process. And that way I have concerns about some of the recommendations in terms of clarity and in terms of language, and I can share those with the committees, and we've got 3 more meetings, so they will have an opportunity to review that and consider it, and that's all I can ask is, you know, here's some language concerns, here's some strategic or policy concerns, please take them into consideration. Now, their final recommendation will be the recommendation of that committee, not my recommendation, but I think all of those committees will be richer and can benefit from that collective input.
That's actually the next thing we're going to be doing, two committees working together to look at each other's recommendations.
So give us the contact information, the latest document, and then give us a deadline. Say you've got a week, 10 days, 2 weeks to provide feedback to the committee chair for these specific initiatives, because we've got a couple of moving deadlines and living documents that keep changing, and I think at some point we need to say, here's the input period. You know, if you're serious, if you have concerns or constructive criticisms, put them in writing and share them with the committee. and then we'll take it from there. And then you can still express your concern about the final product, but you've at least had the opportunity to provide meaningful input and be listened to. And I don't think we can ask for a lot more than that.
Commissioner?
I'm understanding what you're saying. So if your committee had a proposal that you wanted to advance, you would potentially reach out to other ex officio members, other members of the council, express your proposal, allow them an opportunity then to provide feedback to that proposal?
I think we should do that for every committee. And we should make it available to the full group and give people a deadline and contact information on who and when to submit any concerns or suggestions or kudos or whatever kind of feedback they have, so that that committee, whether it's training, policy, recruitment, or whatever, can take that into consideration as they weigh what their final recommendation to the full group is going to be. It's still up to that individual committee and its representatives to define what their recommendation is going to be, but they then at least have the benefit. None of us is as smart as all of us. And I'm saying if all of us have input into that process, it becomes that much more valuable and I think legitimate process.
So you want me to take this? I'm sorry.
One follow-up to that, and I think that you're absolutely right as it relates to the process of getting richer, fuller information from everyone. I just want to be mindful, and it may be a question to ask Kim. If you have 8 voting members that meet with USEF to get input, does that constitute a meeting? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I think you should tee it up to the general counsel. So there just may be ways in which USEF meets with smaller groups to ensure that we don't potentially run afoul of an open meeting flow.
I'm not even suggesting a meeting. I'm saying give me the email, contact information.
Contact individual.
Yeah, and then I can put it in writing and submit it so that the chair of that committee has something to share or forward to the other members of the group prior to their gathering, and they can make that part of their agenda from, regardless of where it comes from. So that if Commissioner Carter has concerns, if you have concerns, it goes on their plate. And then the recruitment committee, which Isaac chairs, will sit down, look at our draft recommendations, take into account all the other feedback that we have received in writing by the deadline, and then that makes our recommendations that much fuller and better, in my opinion.
So I would send this electronic copy of this out to the entire council with contact information for the work groups and a deadline for people to review, give feedback, and contact directly the chairs of the individual work groups.
Could I add a process piece? If we gave our suggestions for the full document to you, Karen, and then you sent those comments that went for each of the work groups, then you would be able to see where we're getting a little bit of traction, and people may have suggestions about the report overall, and then we'll have a place for that to go. So then we would have one document with all of the suggestions for the revisions.
Yep, that sounds good. And people did do that after the first one, but we haven't done that in quite a while. People did send me their
I think
comments.
as long as we're not editing or selecting
Right.
input and feedback, I don't have a problem with that. So, same result.
But at the end of the day, I'm still a little unclear about Mr. Flaherty's point. So after all that happens, are we utilizing voting members, or are we just calling them voting members for what purpose?
No, we're utilizing the voting.
To vote on the final document that's going to the governor. The content.
James, wouldn't it be a better process if each committee chair presented the recommendations of their work group and allow voting members to discuss and approve each work group? And then in doing that, we're in essence approving the final report that's going to go to the governor and the legislature. They could send out their recommendations to us in advance, and then we could, I don't think this would be that time consuming to have the chair of each group report. Here's kind of the analysis of what we discussed, and here are our recommendations. And then the voting members either say yea or nay, or delete this, or how about would you include this? there's some reason we were called voting members. And there's gotta be some, we have to have some authority to vote. That was the whole purpose of the way the structure was made. Otherwise, you wouldn't have called voting members and voting members are here for a reason. And it would seem to me, because I don't know the work, and I know a lot of people have put a lot of time and thought and so forth in their recommendations. And I just think they should have the opportunity to share their work with all of us. An oral presentation, and then follow-up discussion and subsequently a vote. We might find some things to add, we might find some things to amend, or we might find some things to delete. But it's an open discussion had by all voting members. To me, that would be the fair process.
I agree with you, Dennis. As a matter of fact, in doing that, I think we would reach consensus.
Yeah, that's how that's a good point.
Let me hear some other thoughts about that.
So, one concern that I have is, it would be as part, I understand your point, I understand the points that have been made, but we need to ask ourselves whether that would be consistent with the practice and expectations that have been developed throughout the process thus far. And the principle of what's called detrimental reliance by folks in participating openly and having their voice validated and a part of discussion, to then come to a point where we say only the voting members. I'm a voting member, so for me, the discussion is not going to impact me in a way that disadvantages me. But if we think about the other folks around the table, are we then, as the chief said earlier, Chief Johnson, are we our own worst enemies in that, where we're not going to be excluding folks from the actual vote? I'm asking the question. I don't know. I don't remember, nor do I know at this moment the breakdown of how many of the voting members are in a general kind of community sense and how many are not versus any other type of background. I don't know that right now.
Well,
but it at least raises a question. And if we're working from the point, going to Commissioner Carter's point earlier, of trying to really engage community and validate their voice in principle with the document and the recommendations, we at least should question ourselves to that. And that goes before the actual decision of yes, only voting versus not. There's been a practice of this group to operate in a fashion where their expectations have been built along the way. So we should at least, I think, ask ourselves about that and the value of having that. To James' point earlier, the basis for having a cutoff between voting and non-voting was not merit-based. It required someone's voice was less than meritorious in the process. It was more along the lines of, from a legality point of view, there are limitations to that, and having to draw it down to 15 was within the parameters of what's allowed with an executive order. Beyond that, though, that means the other 15 members are not any less important, or the voice isn't important in that. So we need to, I would ask the group, let's ask ourselves that question first before we go down the point of having and drawing a fine line of, if you're voting yes, if you're not, then you don't have this formal.
I'm not suggesting.
I have an opinion, but I signed up for this to be, and I'm a non-voting member. I take no offense at all to the governor's appointment process of 15 voting, 17 non-voting. This group has done a marvelous job of collective input. There's been no note on here that says non-voting and voting or anything like that. It's been a great process for that. So when it comes down to the final recommendation, though, I will have a lot of input on everything, but I'm just not voting. And it's not a bad thing. It's not a sad thing. It's not a negative thing. It is what it is. It's how it's constructed. And I think we got to stay true to that. So with that said, I agree with Danny. I think it's time we finish the work group work. And we spend August 8th and August 15th presenting the recommendations. So August is present, discuss, get consensus. September is build the final report, have 1 or 2 meetings in September, get it done before the deadline, take the pressure off of us, and bring it to a head, and let's get talking about the final document, how it's gonna be built, and how it's gonna be put together. So we have a meeting in July next week, you know, then August 8th, August 15th, let's present them, discuss them, debate them, reach consensus, everybody provide input, and then do the final report, draft, and then September we discuss it in total, and then some meeting in mid-September, the voters vote and the non-voting members don't. You know, let's process this now to the finish with bright lines of the discussion as a group, you know, and let's stop the work group conversations if we have. There's been so many of those, and I think it's time to bring it to a head and get talking about it as a team. Because we've been a good team ever since the beginning. That's just my opinion.
The whole idea of open conversations and discussions, healthy discussions, and hearing any concerns, and coming to, as best we can, a consensus during a time frame that allows us to really have input, and I'm a non-voting member, but certainly want to be a part of those discussions that we move forward. I don't think that in the end, there should really be any surprises. We will talk through this to the extent that we pretty much know where people are. And I fully endorse that as well, as a non-voting member, that we have that type of transparency moving to our goals.
I think my just input is that we established kind of a working pattern, getting to something where we would be comfortable to say that I think we're at that point where we can vote it through and let it go. I think talking about the voting, while we did not set those expectations in the early process, makes it seem like that we're rushing a bit. If we are comfortable to move it forward, that's what the voting is for. If we are a deadlock, that's what the voting is for. If we can't move anything, that's what the voting is for. But to expedite the voting before we feel comfortable to have something that has been at least worked on, seems to be a bit premature. Unless we already set that expectations from day one and we voted on ending the meeting, starting the meeting, talking, whatever, all those Robert rules processes of doing this. So that's my recommendation.
So to speak to Dave's point, if we do have August as an opportunity for presentation and feedback, are the working groups ready to send out, for someone to send out the document, or for me to send out the document, for you to give me your collective feedback, and then give it to the working groups, the chairs, so that they can incorporate it or not incorporate it into their recommendations, to do all of that in time for that August meeting. So there's one meeting in between which you could potentially use for sharing in small groups or something. But are the working groups at a point where they feel like they can do that by the August meeting?
I want to comment on that, that
Yeah.
we still have that processing of community input.
Right.
And we still need to see that divided or separated input to consider in our work groups. I think that once we've been able to do that, it's real clear that these are recommendations we're considering to add to or to reflect, to potentially adjusting recommentions according to that community input. Once we've been able to see that, and if that's in our next meeting to be processed then in August, I think we would be ready. But that's a very important
So
step.
spending the next meeting engaging with that information from the community and figuring out how to incorporate that into the recommendations.
Which would take
is what
yet
you're
another
saying.
meeting, so we're talking August. I think we'd be ready to go.
Any thoughts?
Subject to what the commissioner was describing, our working group can meet the deadlines you just described.
Other chairs?
I just wanted to repeat, let's avoid the bottleneck in the argument at the end. If people have concerns or issues or suggestions or recommendations, let's get them on the table and get them to the committees or share them with the entire group so that they're out there and they can be freely and honestly discussed. Why wait till we have a bottleneck at the end.
So I think we could potentially send this out right away and get feedback, and then have that feedback incorporated by our next meeting, at which time we can bring in the community feedback to a revised version based on everyone's input. So combine the two?
Next meeting, you mean the one next week or the one on?
Is it next week?
Yeah.
That's not gonna happen by next week. Okay.
25th, 8th, and then 15th are the
Yeah,
next three.
we could, I mean, we're getting into the detail here now, but we could potentially use the next meeting
Just
to,
give people the.
yeah, to give people a chance to get their feedback. Yeah, sure. Do you want to work that out? I mean, do that, work it out? Okay.
I want to hear from the other chairs of the committees. Isaac said that to work with.
Well, I would just say, I mean, our work group has sort of been the most concise and the most consistent in that, resulted in legislation that we're gonna have to follow from the post board standpoint. So I don't know if there's additional recommendations, certainly.
That's about all that's left for us to
Right,
do as a
right.
group is take in the feedback. And you've got a bill side that looks remarkably similar to.
Well, it's
original
consistent with
recommendations.
what's been in this document, and I just want to make sure that we, I'll speak from the post board standpoint, is, I have to ensure what I'm talking about voting is that what, in some of these areas, what, to be able to at least poll the board as to what, is that something they support? They certainly support the activities of the police training group, what resulted in the legislation being signed, so.
So I'm here for both of you, that could work because a lot of work's been done. Just incorporate that.
I think so, unless Commissioner Carter has other feedback that she's been getting, or Clarence, I don't know what else people have been sending to us. I mean, we've been.
So we're gonna incorporate that feedback. So the next meeting will be incorporating that feedback that we got from the community and having that discussion.
Yes.
So I just want to make sure that you're comfortable with the timeline based upon that.
Well, to that point, I mean, there's an excellent example. Yes, we did get a bill passed, and it was a very good bill, but number one, it fell short on the funding. The Law Enforcement Coalition that put the bill together had talked about $10 million, and we ended up with $6 million. Some people in this room thought it should be $20 million. So maybe your group could think about additional funding in that regard. And secondly, they put a cap on it, a sunset provision, which we did not want, which sunsets this whole thing in 4 years. Now, clearly, the need for police training isn't going to go away in 4 years. And that was strictly done, well, I won't go into the motivation part, but the bottom line is, there's two things that happened to that bill that isn't in law enforcement's best interest, and maybe what could come out of this group is a recommendation that additional funding be sought for the police training and that the sunset be removed. Because I can see what's going to happen is in 4 years, which will go by fast, somebody's going to have to do the heavy lifting at that time. It would seem to me that this committee really ought to weigh in on that and get the legislature to address that next year. I mean, it was, at least in my conversations with the governor early on, which started this whole law enforcement coalition, we had talked about $10 million. And it went from 10 quickly down to 6.5, and then ultimately at 3 o'clock in the morning, well, you got to settle for $6 million. Obviously, we said, great, we'll take it. Who's going to, we're basically tripling the peace officer training fund. But I think many of us in this room understand clearly the importance of police training. There's nothing more important. There's no recommendation that can come out of this group greater than more training money available for peace officers to help chiefs and sheriffs provide good quality training for their members of their departments. And that's a good thing. That everybody benefits when we can do that. So I would think you might want to think about maybe including something like that in your report. Those are things that I think all of us should be able to embrace.
Interesting. As I look at the recommendations that are on the table now, and as a community member, the question I have is what kind of training are you talking about? Because the document itself suggests that a great deal of clarity is needed around exactly what is meant by the language and the training recommendations from that committee. So I don't think we can say it's in everybody's best interest or that everybody supports it until we clarify exactly what it is that we're talking about. That's fine. That's all. And those are some of the considerations that I would like to make part of the conversation, so that it's not just, you know, this group is called the Governor's Council on Law Enforcement and Community. So I think it needs to be mutually beneficial, not just law enforcement beneficial.
And I would also raise the issue, and I don't know how much discussion we've had as a group on this, but metrics tied to the training as well. With any type of expenditure, typically speaking, the legislature wants to see the ROI, return on investment in some way, and metrics as well in terms of what has been done and what behavior changes or improvements that come as a result. So I would like to see some language along those lines in this, and that would be a piece of the feedback that I would offer as well in terms of having that, I'm sorry, evaluation, right? So there are things that I think it's the purpose of our discussion now to kind of raise this line by line or document or page by page, but certainly there are ideas here, or at least requests for clarity in the language that can benefit the report, because if the questions are arising here, most certainly they're likely to arise on August 5th, or August 5th for the listening session with community. So the less ambiguity that we get to hear and have a tighter document, the stronger the document will be in front of the community, and the community can be more substantive in their comments and in their feedback.
One thing one of my roles as a part of my contract is to help with the measurement and evaluation piece for this, so I would be working with the respective work groups to come up with what that would look like.
And would that be included then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. And then just before, you're changing that, okay. Okay. Commissioner Lindsay?
Yes.
You had a question?
I just want to thank Luce Marie Frias for her efforts. So my thought, from what I'm hearing, is that it's critically important that we hear the voice of community as it relates to the recommendation. What it also seems to me, what I'm hearing, is that there may be subtle nuances, either because action has happened during the course of the legislative session, which may cause us to tweak a proposal or two, or there may be some questions that people now would like to propose to another committee, and then we could also tweak that. So it seems to me that if we announce and spend some time at the 25th meeting to tighten up the language, then we might be in a position to then post. So the community would at least have 10 days in which then to see what those proposals, to be informed and be able to respond back. It's still a tight time frame for them, but at least gives them some time to do that. Do we want to use maybe the 8th meeting also to provide an opportunity for public comment back? Because then we at least have 2 opportunities for community feedback, and then we could use the 15th, going back to Dave's proposal and timeline, to then strengthen the writing within the document, within the recommendations. I think we all have had enough time together that we could probably look at each other's proposals and recommendations and say, here's a question that you're likely to get from the public. And then use that time on the 25th to strengthen the document before we present it to the public.
The question I would have, Commissioner Lindsay, is that the meeting on the 25th is not 10 days away, it's a week away. And are you presuming that people would review the document, provide feedback to the committee chairs, and that the committees would then meet and consider that input before the meeting next week?
I think right now that there is enough information that exists concerning proposals, I think other committees, that questions could be asked today, which could actually strengthen the proposals as they're currently written in this document. I think Luce kind of demonstrated that in one of her questions as it relates to some of the proposals which are already crafted. That could get us to a point. Whether it be further refinement, I assume that there still will be further refinement. But I think we'll be in a very strong position to articulate what we think to the community is important from the council's perspective.
So you think the deadline should be today for feedback?
I think the 25th is just a full council meeting, right? So to that extent, comments today from the respective committees, use the 25th to do the final polishing, the July 25th.
You know, I'm not confident that everybody who is not present today would have had the opportunity to review and provide input, and that the committees would have had the opportunity to meet in that short period. I think you need at least a week to 10 days for turnaround, because we talked about people providing Ms. DeYoung with the information, and then her distributing it to the chairs, and then the chairs sharing it with their respective committee members before we come back together, so that they've had the opportunity to thoroughly review it. And if we were to just do it today, that might be somewhat advantageous for those who are present, but it makes me feel like we're a committee of one, rather than I'm sitting down and communicating with the people representing the NAACP and saying, what do we think is in the mutual best interest of law enforcement and the community, and how do we frame and shape our input to the respective committees. So I would really like to provide an opportunity for everybody to have the information, to be able to take the time to carefully review it, and then provide the input and the feedback before we gather and then act on it. And if people, because then you put the information in writing, and it's shared with everybody. And because a number of the representatives here are absent, because we're in a vacation schedule, there may be people who might not be able to be here on the 25th, and it would provide them with an opportunity to have meaningful input, whether they were able to be present or not, so that at least their 2 cents would be a part of the mix. That's just my concern.
I'm more than willing to accede to sort of the committee or the council's view as it relates to what's adequate time to prepare. But that then begs the question as it relates to this community listening session on the 5th. Because what I hear you saying is that we won't really be in a position to really communicate to the public at large to have that be effective. Because we'll still be in the process of working through recommendations. Which I'm okay with.
I think it depends on when the deadline is, and if the information, and I'm sure Mr. Young forwards it promptly to the chairs, and then those chairs schedule a meeting ASAP to review and refine, that there then could be a better draft or a more inclusive draft, or some indication of what the overall concerns are about the existing draft that could be available on the 5th, reasonable?
That sounds
So
reasonable
if
to me.
the first were the deadline, or whenever the deadline was, to give you ample turnaround time to review and forward, and then for the committee chair, because we tried 5 or 6 times to schedule a meeting and had difficulty just getting all of our people together to come to the table. In fact, I think you and I were the only 2 people that met over the course of a month trying to pull the committee together.
That's correct.
So if he gets the information, they can bicycle it out, then other people can review it, and if we can't meet, they can say, you know, I'm okay with this, or I'm concerned about that, or as Danny said, I'm opposed to this. And the committee then has that information going forward I can share that with you.
So Commissioner Lindsay, to your point, there's nothing magic about the 5th date. So if we want to move that 5th date out to have revised recommendations with the input, with the feedback, we can do that. Because this hasn't been announced publicly yet. It hasn't been posted yet. So we can move that out to give more time, so we can move that so the community can get it in advance, see the revised recommendations, and then go forward.
I appreciate that.
To that point, I did, in the sessions that I did attend, there are people who are coming to every session who do keep saying, why do we have this, we're giving you all this good information? Why do the recommendations look the same from one meeting to the next? So it would be helpful. Liz?
The other issue along the lines of the community listening session is location is in Rochester, which I think it's wonderful to include our areas that are not in the metro, so non-metro area. But it begs the question because of the importance and the timing of the finality of the report thereafter. So can we consider having a process by which other folks who are not in Rochester, if they're in Moorhead or, you know, further north in Minnesota or even locally within the metro, to be able to send in their comments within a time certain, that would then really reflect our openness of embracing community input. We may not get any, I don't know, but if the folks in St. Cloud find it difficult to drive to Rochester, we should accommodate that.
I'll let Ruben.
So yes, to that point, I'm working with James' office to put together an email address for that specific purpose so that we can advertise that email address so that people who are not able to attend a specific listening session have the opportunity to provide their input via email to that specific. So we're hoping to get that up and running by as early as next week. So.
I just want to back up to the discussion about the return on investment and the metrics and sort of understand them, because that, as we carry out this process to develop learning objectives from which training can be built, we are collecting the data which we lawfully can collect on evaluations of the courses. It's essentially a free market system of the types of training that are built that agencies then will send officers to. And we are collecting that data, and I'm just not sure. I would need more information on what the expectations are about that return on investment. What does that mean? I don't know if a law enforcement agency it'd be hard to measure that.
How do you measure something that doesn't happen?
Well, I mean, measure the evaluation of the course. I mean, certainly we'll ensure they meet learning objectives and follow the post-approved process to get it post-approved. I just don't, I guess I need more information on it.
I welcome that question because
Yeah.
I have a solid example to give you. One of many. As it pertains to implicit bias, there's an instrument called an IDI, all right, Intercultural Development Initiative. And the IDI can be administered in year one of the funding grant, and then, as you say, Denny, it goes 4 years, right? So we could then measure year 3 or year 4 to see what that continuum of improvement has been for every individual officer who participated in that training, and as well as the department. So that is
I
part.
wouldn't be able to require that. The post board would not be able to require.
But that's where we think outside the
Unless-
box.
okay.
And if we want to leverage the influence of this group to then ask for more funding, then there has to be this give and take, right? It has to be thinking about outside the box. What are those tools and instruments that we know exist within the implicit bias training community and availability of tools? And what role does that play then to then persuade not only the legislators but the public as well to show and demonstrate that in fact this training has made a difference, and then ask for additional or long-term training as a result. And that will certainly strengthen the argument and the position of this council as well as the board.
We're also looking at training for chiefs, for supervisors, and for people who are already on law enforcement agency payrolls. Law officers, support staff, administrators, from the boardroom to the boiler room, so that we have entire departments who are up to speed on these issues. And I was responsible for this training for 6,000 employees in the St. Paul Public Schools. And one of the lessons we learned early on was that principals, supervisors, and administrators were very uncomfortable and unwilling to facilitate these courageous conversations because they had not been trained and did not have a sufficient knowledge base or comfort level with it themselves. So I don't think we're talking just about new people coming into the system. We're talking about existing people who are in the system as well.
Let me throw my monkey wrench in here, which is not intended to be obstructive. One of the things that we've said, particularly with our committee, and hopefully the group at large has bought into this, is we have to recommend things that are realistic, that we can actually implement. Here's my example. My understanding of the legislation is this. If your license, we are on 3-year license cycles as peace officers. If your license expires after July 1st of next year, when the money is slated to kick in, you've got 3 years to complete that 16 hours of mandatory training, right? That's recommended by this council. And so how are you gonna measure? I would think that you would want a more long-term measurement, right? It doesn't appear to me that this is something that you would be able to get some substantive measurement out of after 1 cycle or 2 cycles of training. It would appear to me. So every officer in the state doesn't have to be compliant with this until that 4th year when it sunsets. And so are you going to measure some officers but not others? Or are you going to stagger your evaluation process so that you can get a longer term? It's kind of like we measure crime statistics in this profession. You can't do it week to week or month to month or year to year to get anything accurate, right? You have to stretch that out over a 3 to 5 year time frame so that you do have something substantive. So we have to be mindful, and I would invite everybody to remember that it's got to be something realistic within the confines of the law, right? The Minnesota Post Board is bound by some state statute, so while we can think outside the box all day long, if it doesn't fit within the parameters of the law, or it's outside of their purview, how are we going to get it implemented?
I see some hands up with the commissioner.
I was just going to say that I think some of this is the detail that we may not necessarily be responsible for working out. I know that we have to have metrics, and there are some that, because we're making recommendations to the state, Karen will help us to develop a statewide metrics. The Post Board has a responsibility and is bound by some restrictions that we won't work out. But I'm thinking we're not going to be requiring that everything be done statewide through the Post Board. We've talked about community compact, and I think that we may see that some communities adopt training that others don't, and that measurement at a community level is also possible. So I think that, there's a lot we have to work out. We won't work it out all right now, but some's going to be state level and some's going to be community. And I just think we have to have that flexibility.
So I would just add that everything is measurable in some way. And we shouldn't have this debate at this table because there are professionals who do that, and they do it to help prove whether $1 million or $1 spent has value and has the impact that we intend. So professional evaluators can work with this group or work with Karen or work with whomever to help design evaluation that is appropriate for the goals and the ideals that we put together. What I'm really concerned about, though, is that evaluation and wise evaluation costs money. And it should be built into as a percentage of any kind of expending that we're doing. Because
10% is the guideline.
Right, 10%, right? So, and I'm a grant maker. We require, so we're doing a big $1 million expenditure right now. And 10% of that grant, of that $1 million spend, has to be for evaluation. Because we wouldn't make that second $1 million grant without proving that the first $1 million actually works. And government should care, just like the nonprofit sector cares. And should understand that if you're gonna allocate $6 million to a program that's vitally important, and I fully support that what got through, and I agree that it should have been more, we ought to be allocating 10% or a significant percent of that money to evaluate whether it actually worked. Because maybe you would never spend that $6 million again, or maybe it's working so well that you'd spend $60 million in future years. And we should all embrace wise evaluation and not be concerned at this table whether something is measurable or not. Lou's mentioned one way to measure solid training that I agree would be a good way and very implementable. Everyone in my organization takes the IDI annually and is measured on how they're progressing in terms of implicit bias. And it's one interesting tool, but evaluation is both doable for everything. We have to pay for it and acknowledge maybe in these recommendations that it costs money and be clear that it costs money, and it's wise money to spend because you wouldn't put another dollar towards something that isn't working.
This is one thing we talked about in our first meetings as far as how do we provide recommendations that start turning in the direction that we all want. The question that's being raised through this discussion is who is going to follow up on that? And how do we create a flexibility around that? And that's where I talked about oversight, and I think there's some rashes that got up. I mean, there's a sense of like, what was that? What are we doing? There's this too far. The point is, there has to be a sense of continuous improvement element to make sure that we can continue to improve in a way that we're addressing this issue. Because I don't think if we had the silver bullet or the magic bullet, we wouldn't be here, right? So I think we're heading in the direction of improving training, but where is the role of continuously finding so that we're always at the edge, rather than creating, again, the same issue of where is the community's input, what does that look like, what strategies are we putting in. One of the suggestions that we had initially in our recommendations was this kind of out of the box that has to be an element of training, that we have to think about things that are not necessarily being used right now, so that we are improving. Because whatever we're using, and I'm not talking about just here in Minnesota, but across the country, needs an improvement. So if we are going to direct ourselves into a better training process, then we have to be open for new ideas that may fail, but we are going to allow for that constant improvement.
I'm sorry to move.
Yeah, to Giovanna's point, I think as we've thought about a lot of our recommendations, we're working within this box of what's realistic with the existing system. And I think that the task of this group is to transform that system, and that we are able to say there needs to be changes in policies and laws to be able to move this forward. And I think it would be disappointing if at the end of this process we came up with recommendations that only existed within the current system, because that hasn't been working.
Yeah, to that point, if we keep doing the same thing and expect a different result, that's a definition of insanity. So I don't know that any one of us really wants to be known for having that role on this council. I know, I'll speak for myself, I don't want to be in that position. You know, the other part of this, when we talk about the training, when you're in management, the philosophy is the training is for someone's improvement and to grow as an individual, not for something that has to be done to check off a box or get through a process. So just the philosophy of why we're asking the training to be along these lines that we have in our recommendations is to really change how our business is being done within law enforcement across the state, but also to embrace and welcome having that training to be impactful in the community. and not to see it as this regulatory type thing. And I understand the role of coach. I'm an attorney by trade, we have CLEs, all that stuff, we know, but you ask your average person who's going in there for that training, it is supposed to be for your own personal development, so that when I walk into that room, I want to learn something. No one wants to sit in that room and listen to information that they already know. That's a waste of their time. It's about growing as an individual and being able to be responsive to the needs that are being expressed in community.
Dennis.
James. I agree with everything that's being discussed. I would only like to point out, however, that we're really not talking about grants. We're talking about a statute that developed a peace officer training fund, and it's money that the state gives to the post board to just turn around and divvy up to all of the communities in our state that employ peace officers. If we could write into a law some evaluation process, I'm all for that. I'm not aware, and maybe others in the room are, where the legislature does that on any state dollars. It may be, and you know.
Education.
Pardon me?
Education, I mean.
Do they write in, do they put,
D.
excuse me, I just want to finish my point. Do they put in amount of money that says,
No,
to
it's
do what
not-
you're talking about?
It's not separated money to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah, and see, that's kind of the
You're-
problem.
So that could be a reform, to get to your point, that could be a reform that we seek in a fund to actually evaluate the impact of various trainings that you have already and are proposing to add. It could be part of the policy discussion to add.
And it's my understanding under deed grants, where deed makes an appropriation much similar to what you're saying, to an entity in the community, there is an evaluation
Okay.
as part of those grants.
Okay.
So the recipient needs to meet their benchmarks in terms of the metrics and then have an evaluation. So it wouldn't be a departure from other practices regarding appropriations.
And I would just ask then, as part of that, I'm writing some notes as a reform, is that maybe since the language of our reimbursement fund goes to political subdivisions, that then they be as we're essentially reimbursing funds, it doesn't go to the police department, it goes to the city of St. Paul.
Right.
That then there would be some type of a mechanism to evaluate the specific training
I
of
think
their
we've just
community.
gotten to the core of
There
a
it
really
is.
big issue right now, which is how do you get at continuous improvement and really effective training, and how do we know it's effective? It requires us to actually evaluate it rather than putting it out. And so, and what you all are doing well is exactly what you are legislated to do, which is to move dollars back out into community, and thank you as someone who formerly worked in a local government for moving those monies back out into community. But no one is saying, what are those dollars actually doing from a benefits perspective? And I think that we can create that, and you're right, then that would move with the dollars. But it would have to be expected that some of those dollars would then be used for that kind of an evaluation
In the
and
community.
understanding.
So are we suggesting that the only way to measure if something is effective is that there's a matrix attached to it? That somebody else developed?
I think we get a little intimidated by the word evaluation, and I'm someone who hates really elaborative, crazy evaluation that takes millions of dollars to do. There are ways of doing evaluation that are reasonable and get at the very point of the dollars themselves without being so challenging to do. So I think in this case, we're charged by the community, I think, to figure out how to build this relationship between community and police. And I think that's a hard thing to measure, and we ought to have someone telling us, helping us figure out how to measure that. And then that could be, if we could identify and come to some agreement about how we're gonna measure that police-community relationship, which is so important.
If I can just
So,
add,
Joanne, real quick, Isaac had his hand up.
Just James, as you pointed out at the very beginning of this meeting, we're operating in real time and the facts on the ground are always changing. And I think part of the essential importance of this evaluation piece that we're talking about is that, you know, if God forbid there are other critical incidents as this process goes forward, there's going to be people in the public who are saying, hey, the training is wrong, the training isn't working, where's the training? We need to be able to have reliable, you know, professional evaluations, data, what have you, to say, yes, the training is working here and here's how. And you, in the public, you need to have patience and you need to, you know, get on board with us to allow this to happen.
I would augment something that Isaac said and take it a step further. I would suggest, Chief Anderson, we need to be looking at this through a slightly different lens. Because there are process evaluations that judge how many people take a course, how many people graduate from the course, and then there are utilization-focused evaluations. Because if you don't know where you want to go, any road will take you there. And you can dole the money out, people can do whatever the hell they want with it, okay? But you then have no way to revise the strategy or the training in midstream, or to use the results of the initial phases to improve the training as you go along. And if you don't have that continuous improvement lens to look at whatever you're doing, whether it's police-community relations or contact with the public or use of deadly force, whatever it happens to be, you're going to be like a broken record stuck in a groove that just goes around and, as Ms. Frias suggested, repeats itself. So you need to look at what's working, what isn't, how do we improve it, you know, and think of it as a matter of public accountability, rather than being handcuffed or being saddled with metrics and evaluations. The only things you keep are things you share. You may, through your evaluation, learn some things in St. Cloud, which if shared through Dennis's group or through Nathan's work, would benefit police departments all over the state of Minnesota. But if nobody is doing that type of utilization-focused evaluations, then nobody benefits. So I think it really can be beneficial, not just for individual departments, but for law enforcement in general.
And mentally, are we suggesting, and it was a question, it has nothing to do with me being put off by formal evaluations or the word evaluation. I'm asking a question. Are we suggesting here that the only way for us to measure if something is effective is by having a quote-unquote matrix attached to it? Because to your point, as a practitioner, I can think of a half a dozen ways that I can measure whether or not police-community relationships where I work are effective, where they need improvement, where we're deficient. And that doesn't mean that I'm not for evaluating and having some standards to make sure that we keep moving forward. I'm simply saying that there are other ways for us to accomplish that, and so we would be remiss if we didn't talk about it.
So if I can just interrupt. When it comes to evaluation, it itself, it's its own entity. And there are both qualitative and quantitative evaluation. And I don't think it's just about this statistics or that statistics. And statistics could also be completely misleading. If you're in rural Minnesota and you have one death for a population of 10 people, that's not the same as Indianapolis. So the statistics are completely different. But I think what we really are looking at right now, we don't have. How do we improve the training? And so evaluation is one piece. There is, that's itself is one piece, but also having the flexibility to introduce something that you're not even considering. Where is that role? So I think it's both evaluating, introducing, and that evaluation piece, I think it's in the nitty gritty, what works for each sector, which department, and so evaluation itself could be a huge another quicksand to a certain extent when it comes to how do we dissect that. But I think in the main goal is we don't have that, at least from my understanding, from that large perspective, and we don't have something that can self-improve. And if we bring those two elements, then we can continually address things to get it to a point where I think that improvement is on.
Senator Carlson.
Yeah, thank you. There's something that's been
on my mind quite a bit while we're talking about evaluations, and I'm wondering if Dave can help with what his job is providing insurance for police and community relations. And I think that there's probably a lot of money that has come out of the league, and I think you do provide the insurance for large and small cities. And is there a rating from the insurance companies on this sort of thing, and can they help? You know, they obviously must have some statistical evidence as to how they set ratings, and I don't know if the league provides self-insurance or just where it's at. But it seems to me that there's a return on investment that's cash money when there's a better rating for a city that has done things right. Because we know that there's a lot of cities that don't have the problems that we're trying to address. And I think that they probably have a better rating. And I'm just wondering if there is statistical evidence, if there's factual evidence of the different ratings of different cities, and how can we make that improve? Because obviously, even community relations, there's a lot of lawsuits that happen, and a lot of payouts that happen for things that aren't what we're considering here for the most part. And if we have the insurance companies help us with that, because this is what they're experts in, this is their job. And they have to make sure that they're going to make some money by telling us what we need to do.
Sam?
You know, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, you sat here and you told us how great a job you're doing in St. Cloud in terms of training your staff. Some way you've been keeping track of numbers on being able to say that, right?
There are many ways I keep track.
Yeah, and that's an evaluation.
I'm aware of that.
And so all we're saying is, how do we be able to say this is working? Secondly, where my confusion is we're talking about training, but we got 3 other committees here, and we're not talking about how do you connect the training to, so if you only got 16-hour training, how does the health and wellness fit into that? And how does that fit into training? Because the health and wellness is going to continue after the training, right? And so how do we connect these dots? Because it's bigger than training. Because if it's all about just training, that's bullshit. Because I know folks go through training, and if we ain't following none of these other pieces, it don't matter. Because they've been doing training forever. They've been doing training, supposedly, I've been here, they've been doing training for police from way back when. You know?
And thank you for making my point while trying to dispute, because somehow we have laser beamed in on training. Somehow the buzzword has gotten to be, we need to more de-escalation training. I will submit to you all as a practitioner, not to make excuses. That's day one of cop school.
Right.
De-escalation, because we're the ones who always bring a firearm to every situation. That's day one.
Right.
Doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be enhanced or that we can't do more, but this idea and this suggestion that we're not doing any, we need de-escalation training. Well, it already exists. There needs to be, there's always room for improvement.
Right.
And here's what I would like to stop happening at this table. Please listen to what I am saying and don't think for me. Don't interpret what I mean. I'm asking clear and concise questions.
Right.
Because I'm trying to get a feel for where we are, because this is supposed to be comprehensive, right? This entails a whole lot more than training, you guys. As a practitioner, I'm telling you, some of the issues that we have don't have a damn thing to do with the amount of training or the type of training. It has to do with leadership. We ain't talking about that at this table. It has to do with the kinds of cultures that are being suborned by my colleagues, by people who sit in my chair, and all the training in the world for line staff isn't going to fix that. If you've got somebody sitting in my chair that doesn't have enough spine to say, when they know they've got a bad apple, now, you gotta go. When they know they're gonna have to fight arbitrators and unions, you still have to go. And if they make me take you back, then I'll find somewhere else for you other than the street. I'm telling you guys, and if you don't want to hear it, then close your ears.
but a lot of this has to do with leadership.
Chief, can I ask you a clear, direct question?
Yes, sir.
How many hours in the next 3 years will your men spend each on use of deadly force, on the firing range, and on those aspects of law enforcement?
More than the minimum.
How many is that?
Probably for my agency, because we have the resources.
Over the next 3 years?
Over the next 3 years, more than 50 each.
50 hours over the total 3 years?
More than 50
per year?
More than 50.
Per year or?
Over the total.
Okay, as a community representative of this body, what I would like to feel is the same level of comfort that the 16 hours devoted to this training will receive the same attention and priority that the 50 hours that they get in the use of deadly force and in firing their guns at the gun range gets, okay?
Yep.
And that's what I see as mutually beneficial, both for law enforcement and for the community. So it's not just us saying law enforcement better do this or needs to do that, but the community voice is that if we only have 16 hours and the use of deadly force and the other firing range activities have 50 hours, then, you know, some of us wonder, what are the priorities, okay? And we would like to feel comfortable that those are going to be the best 16 hours possible. That's all we're asking.
And
We're
so
not
I would
saying-
invite you to think that
We're not saying miracles
I appreciate that.
or don't do the firing range or the use of deadly
appreciate
force. We're saying do this justice too.
And so what, again, I'm inviting everybody to consider is that there are agencies, more than a few, more than a handful, that do value some of the things in our recommendations and that we're talking about at the table, and they devote as much time, if not more.
That's
to those-
a
to
good
those
point. The
things.
16 hours served only as a minimum. Most officers are receiving way more than that. But, you know, we did the 16 because it syncs with the post board's requirement for a 3-year license. It's 48 credit hours in a 3-year cycle, so we said that an officer must receive 16 hours in the areas of mental health and de-escalation and cultural competency, and I think I mentioned.
And you can absolutely glean what's important
That's a
to an
minimum.
agency by how much time they spend on particular modules of training.
If you ask St. Paul,
So the first year.
Order,
after
real
the
quick.
training for St.
Lisa,
Paul.
real quick.
okay, well then
We want to open it up for everybody to speak, so it's not,
Yes,
so
sir.
Luce, Nate, Tony, and then Clarence. Luce?
So, Chief Anderson, we appreciate your candor and your statement about leadership. I think it's the first time that I've heard it this evening, so thank you for that level of candor. And my question would be, why is it an either or, why isn't it both and? Leadership and the training. When I look at the report for the National Initiative on Building Trust that was headed up by the Department of Justice, that focused on key cities, I think it was 5 or 6 cities around the country, Minneapolis being one of which, as well as the post-Ferguson report and the Baltimore report, they all focus on the training, the importance of training, the de-escalation of tactics, as well as implicit bias. It would be my interpretation of that report and the statements that you've made this afternoon, that it would be a both and. It would be changing the leadership there, but also paying attention to the type of training that's being used. I think a few people would be convinced upon seeing either the video of the shooting of Mr. Castile or the shooting that occurred this weekend, that de-escalation was not a factor. We don't know the facts of it, but I think your average reasonable person, which is a standard in law, would question whether or not de-escalation training and tactics had been appropriately implemented and deployed in that particular circumstance. There's a question. I'm not making a judgment as to yes or no. I'm saying that it calls into question. And by the fact that it's being called into question, then at least we should be open to the conversation about having additional de-escalation tactics and evaluating and assessing whether the current ones that are in place are in fact effective or not, or whether we need to look at something that is more effective.
that is being implemented elsewhere in other jurisdictions? I don't know the question, I don't know the answer to that question, but at least it's incumbent upon us as a council to ask us ourselves those sort of questions.
And let me be clear, I'm not suggesting it's an either or. I'll give you another example. The Tamir Rice shooting in Cleveland, Ohio. Okay? 2 seconds after the officer exited that vehicle, shot a 12-year-old boy that had a fake gun in his hand. Awful situation, right? Leadership. Because the Cleveland Police Department didn't do a background, because if they had, they would have found where the previous chief who fired that guy annotated that this person is not responding to training, and more training will not change that. And so he got hired because due diligence wasn't done. And that's all I'm suggesting, and inviting the group to think about those things, those nuances, those things that don't show up, right, in any matrix, any evaluation. And so we have to consider that too. I'm not suggesting that it's an either or. What I'm saying is, if you look into a lot of the issues that we've seen nationwide, there's an element there, and there's some history in those places, and how they've been run and how they've been led, and what kind of culture is being cultivated.
And that might be the untold story, the lack of transparency that the rest of us are not seeing.
So Nate?
Just a brief comment that our experience at the Post Board regarding, what the balance of training is certainly, if there are agencies, I think that's been mischaracterized greatly in many media reports on some of the training. Certainly, most Minnesota agencies are very small and lack resources, and they are not dedicating excessive amounts to range skills. It is important for officers to be able to protect themselves and the public as well, and we've certainly seen in the last 3 to 4 years significant uptick in the types of de-escalation, crisis intervention, and what we've seen from that is a very arduous process to get people appropriately educated and trained in those areas. It's really hard to measure what didn't occur. And anecdotally, we know there's situations going on statewide every single day that law enforcement is appropriately handling, and it's the planes that didn't crash, and nobody knows about those, but yeah, I can just tell you that there is balance in the types of training, and I'm comfortable that 16 hours as a minimum for agencies to determine what those needs are for their particular community is. They're all different in many ways, is a real good starting point. But I am concerned, as Isaac pointed out, that things seem to be evolving and changing significantly quickly depending on what the latest tragic incident is before all the facts are known, and it's just going to be difficult for us to, it's going to take time on this piece, which is just only one piece, to roll this out to political subdivisions. And I agree, there are so many other things that can be recommendations for the legislative session to undertake in terms of funding and requirements for political subdivisions accepting state funds to report back to some entity about how the training's working, so.
Tony, then Clarence, and Dave.
I'll make it very, very short. I too appreciate the chief's candor. And I would say that it is really true that we have to have evidence and assessments of outcomes in order to make certain that the funds that are being expended are being well used. It is also really true that you can't measure absolutely everything in these ways. I do agree that everything is measurable, but certainly there are different ways of measuring things. I think the bottom line truly is the relationships that we're trying to have an impact on. The relationship between the police and the community. And what I'm hearing the chief say is that his focus is on knowledge of his community and doing the best work in that community possible. Everything that we're doing here is about that result and achieving the best outcomes in our community based on relationships and knowledge. knowledge. So, you know, I don't want to overcook this. I appreciate that experts can come to the table and help us to be sure that what we think is important can be measured. But that bottom line is the relationships that we're trying to create for a better community.
No, I was just hearing what Blair said about his guys doing 50 hours of training over a 3-year period, when I have learned that the mandatory amount of training is 48 hours over a 3-year period. And the 16 hours of mandatory training in de-escalation is part of that 48 hours. It's not 50 plus 16.
You meant just for firearms. That was just for one discipline.
Okay, but that wasn't part of it though. I mean, the 16 hours is part of the 48 hours, correct?
Right, but I was answering Yusef's question.
Yeah, and I was
about
wanting to
how
make
much.
sure Yusef was clear on that. It wasn't 50 plus 16. That's what I wanted to make clear. And I understand you saying that de-escalation is a regular part of the training. But in a couple of situations here in Minnesota, it's like de-escalation wasn't there. And that's why people are always saying they need this training. You know, they just need to keep doing it until they get it, and it's always there. It's an automatic thing. And in most cases, I'm sure it is, but in just these two prominent cases, it was just so inflamed. It's just like, you know, they forgot about it, everybody forgets about it, but it just needs to be something that's always worked on. Practice makes perfect.
You get no argument from me.
But I mean,
particularly given the circumstances that your family has been through. But again, there are tens of millions of police contacts every year that result in little or no force, let alone lethal force. All I'm asking is to keep those kinds of things in mind as we move forward to try to implement what we think will be best for our state and perhaps that could be utilized nationwide.
Yeah, thanks, James. I've got a few observations. I'll be concise. I agree with the chief. I think leadership is the essential point. And for someone who's been in local government, and small, medium, and large, you know, association management, training is so important. We've spent an hour on it. We've spent an hour on training on one recommendation and 5 pages. So to me, it's kind of an ominous sign of what's ahead for this group. If we're going to spend an hour on every recommendation, and there's 5 pages of them, you know, how are we going to manage this conversation? And I'm going to suggest to James and Karen, as we go forward, you're going to have to put a period on some of this. And we're not even sure where we got with this conversation. But to me, it felt healthy because of what's going on. So I think it was good to do. It was a start for us. But we have a lot of work to do with this entire document if we're going to spend that much time on one single aspect of one single recommendation. I don't think we can do that. How granular do we want to get in our conversation about this stuff is really a question for us as we get into the heart of all of these recommendations. And I think the others are just as important as focus on training. You know, the community aspect, the wellness aspect, the education aspect, and not training of law enforcement of our communities. And all of those are so important, and they're equally as effective as essential for what we're going to produce as a recommendation on should we measure training. You know, we should say, yeah, we recommend some metrics for training. Now let's move on to the next topic. You know, so that's how we have to think about this as we get, because we're running out of time. We're running out of time. So let's be judicious in our conversations and come to a consensus early on how deep we need to go in these, because we have 5 pages to go and just 2 months left. So how are we going to do that? While I say that, I think it was important to do because of where we're at, and maybe it's a model of how we need to look at how we're going to go forward to finish these. So that's all.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. I was just gonna say, I mean, I think those are really important points about either the work group, rather presenting and getting feedback and going through it and getting people to even chance to think about some of these things outside this meeting. But I would say, you know, in throwing some caution to the wind, I think I would be more comfortable pushing us to get to somewhere where we feel very confident rather than chasing the timeline. So if we need to hash something, I think maybe hindsight is always 20/20. We can look back and say we should have had a little extra time on this or a little extra time on that. But I would agree with you that as we get nitty-gritty, there has to be some sort of a recognition of that, so that at least either we table it or have it be discussed a little bit outside of that. So the majority of the time, it's not useful.
And then this is to get off of training, there's one thing that appears to be missing in here, and I don't know where it fits. And maybe I'm wildly off base, and folks can certainly share that. But the piece that seems to be missing to me, and one of the areas we should address, maybe it's policy, is the number of weapons on the street. And the reason I say that is what I used to hear in St. Paul from police officers was that it is a new day in policing. It is the sheer volume of weapons on the street and where they are changes the point of view and perspective of everyone. And it's hard for me to think about this work without thinking about the state we're in today versus the state we were in 20 years ago, or even 15 years ago, quite frankly, in terms of what was readily available and on the street and what cops and community are facing every day in terms of shots fired and weapons on the street. That's a big piece. There were programs back, and Denny, you may have been at the city at the time, there were programs years ago addressing this. There were efforts and incentives and movements, and it made impacts for periods of time. But now we're in the opposite frame, and I think that impacts policing and community.
The number of weapons per household during the 8 years that Barack Obama was president doubled in the United States. So it's not just the number of weapons on the streets, it's the number of weapons in the country and available to burglars and anybody else.
So maybe it's a ridiculous topic, but
I'm just saying that the number of weapons per household has doubled in the United States in the last 8 years.
What I'd like to do is turn back to Karen to go through kind of the process. We agreed to some deadlines, we agreed to some work, and I know in advance she'll agree to this, but it's important for us to move forward with the timeline. When we need to get feedback from you, we need to make sure that you're reviewing the recommendations, getting us feedback. So when we come here, we're not discussing things that we haven't seen before, haven't talked about, but that feedback is being given. Karen will walk through that. I also too sent out, well, I didn't send it out, David sent it out, all of the summaries of the videos for all the listening sessions, plus the notes, so I apologize for that. We also sent you a link to the Facebook page too, which we try to keep updated as well on that. So you'll have that as well. So I'll turn it over to Karen to kind of walk through the process going forward.
Yeah, I don't know that we came to consensus on a deadline for getting collective feedback. We talked about at the next meeting next week, making sure that we send out the reports for the community listing so that we can spend time next week figuring out how to integrate that community feedback into the reports. We talked about me sending out an electronic copy of this report so that individuals can give their feedback on the recommendations. And then it was suggested that you send it to me, and then I can send it to the chairs to incorporate. But what I need to know from you is what is a reasonable amount of time for a deadline for that.
Why don't you and James figure that out and just let us know? We don't need to vote on the deadline.
Okay.
Just decide.
Decide, because then it goes to everybody who's been a part of this process, and they can utilize that or not.
Okay. We'll do that. And commitment here is that it'll get done. Yep. Yes? Okay.
There was one piece, but I can't think of what it was.
And you may move the August 5th date.
We're going to work to the session. So I think, to Dave's point, one of the things that I want to say, I think this was a healthy discussion today for a couple of things. I heard today that I hadn't heard before. There was some actually, I'll take it back. I haven't heard it as well as I wanted to before. It's been before. But just the back and forth that got to a point about some common ground that I heard about, it's a both and, not an either or. That it's both about, the training, but also the accountability and leadership. I want to share with you, the governor's had several meetings with police chiefs. Nate and Denny were there as well as Blair, but also 2 community members. And what's come up quite often is leadership and accountability. Not about just the training piece, but about what happens when that person isn't receptive to training. What happens when that person, you know who it is, what's the accountability piece, and what's the leadership piece about changing that narrative. What also came up amongst community and also police chiefs too is how do we foster more community relationships outside of these incidents that happen, that don't happen on a regular basis, but how do we develop those relationships with the cops and community on an ongoing way? The chiefs had a lot of great suggestions, community had the same as well. So that's something I want to make sure I share as well. And this discussion, I think, led to a lot of those things that we heard. I think we're getting forward to that as well. So I want to make sure that, you know, we know that we are moving forward. This is tough work. I tell people all the time that this is my part-time job, but it's become my full-time job. And I think it's important enough for this state to know we got to move this work forward in a very positive way. So we'll commit to getting you the information that you need. Like I said, thank you for committing to reviewing that information and getting it back. We'll make sure that when we meet the next time, we kind of walk through, and Karen will tell what the process, what that community feedback looks like, and show you how we've seen it, and also I'll include the meetings that the governor has had as well. Let's continue to get feedback. Let's continue, I suggest too, as your groups to meet and talk as well, because one of the things I would like you to do as your group to continue that dialogue you've had in your smaller groups as well. So when you get it and get your individual feedback, that's one thing, but I'd still like you to have conversations with your groups as well as we move forward. Scott, any last words as a co-chair?
I remember the third thing, there was the policy group that was supposed, that they were going to move forward and start to look at the recommendations.
You know, it's an interesting dialogue, but it's not a new dialogue. How do you measure the effectiveness or how well government is doing? It's been debated in this country since the early 1900s. So it's not a new debate. What's the bottom line? Is it fiscal responsibility? Is it citizen perception? Is it, who knows? The difficult part is evaluating, but evaluation is a very important part and often the most overlooked part in the whole public policy making process, because you can kind of think of it as a loop or a circle, and if you don't have the evaluation piece, you don't know how to modify the next part of it. So I think it was a good discussion. We'll keep on having discussions.